Okay, good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Public Sector Summit. Hopefully everyone survived the commute in. We were just up here talking about the fact that there's some challenges commuting right now in the DC area, so we can certainly appreciate that, but thank you everybody for joining us this morning. What I wanted to start with, and I had looked back from my notes from last year, and a couple of the takeaways were leave a lot of time for questions. So start thinking through what your questions are. Last year when we conducted a very similar panel, we walked out of the 45 minutes that we have again today with a significant amount of questions left unanswered. The one thing I wanted to start with this morning is show of hands. So how many in the room are on the government side of the business, so either government, nonprofit? Great. How about any education customers? Good. Thank you. How about partners, AWS partners? And keep your hands up if you're technology partners. What about consulting partners? Great. Very good mix. Last question. International. Do we have any international representation? A couple hands in the back. Great. So a very good mix. And this morning, hopefully, we can cover each one of those verticals. So my name's Troy Bertram. I run for Worldwide Public Sector, our business development and US-based partners, so responsible for our go-to-market strategies in helping ensure that we have contract vehicles and partners aligned to support our customers' requirements. So I'll introduce the panel this morning and then let each one of them go through a little bit of roles and responsibilities, and we'll start from there. So Jane Lacey, Karen Petruska, and Max Peterson. Jane, would you like to start off, give a little bit of background, time at AWS, current responsibilities, and probably prior responsibilities because they're very relevant to the discussion today.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Jane Lacey. I came to Worldwide Public Sector almost 4.5 years ago now, and my background was in contracting in the public sector. I brought that experience to Amazon Web Services and began my adventure into talking with state, local government, federal government, nonprofits, even international, in what does a cloud procurement or cloud contract look like. And we've managed to weave through that process hundreds of times, and I'm really happy to be here today to give some of those best practices and lessons learned. Many of our contracts are primed or awarded to our partner community. So it was relevant when I was asked to come on over in the last couple of months to manage our U.S. Emerging Partner team. So now I actually have touch points with many of you, the partners, in the contracting process firsthand. So thank you for joining us this morning.
Karen, if you could kindly introduce yourself and a little bit of background and how you've worked with AWS from a highlights perspective today.
Okay. So my name is Karen Petruska, and I work at NASA. I've been at NASA for 24 years. The last 10 of them spent over in Southwest at NASA headquarters, but I also served at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, and the NASA Ames Research Center out in Silicon Valley. I'm a computer scientist, and I spent most of my career deploying enterprise-class IT systems at NASA. And so whether it was email or directory services, X500, white pages, PIV badges, all those have been in my scope. And so most recently, data center consolidation and along with it, cloud computing came to be in my job jar. My title is Program Executive for Computing Services, which comprises the totality of data centers and cloud computing, and we've been building an enterprise-managed cloud computing environment at NASA to serve the entire agency through a single enterprise platform since we've been working on that since about 2012.
Great, thank you, Karen, and thank you for joining us, especially to provide the customer perspective, which is so relevant to the topic. Max Peterson.
I'm going to use Karen's example of a job jar, because when you said that, it just struck me as very descriptive of what I've done for the last 4.5 years with Amazon Web Services. I've spent 30 years working with public sector customers and information technology, but 4.5 years ago, I got the opportunity to get on board with a startup. At the time, we had 24 people in our worldwide public sector team, and I got the opportunity in my job jar to have build a worldwide partner ecosystem, build a worldwide capture, contract, and bid and proposal team, and then build a worldwide contracts team. And so that was what was originally in my job jar. I've had the phenomenal opportunity to work with Karen and folks like Karen, who were early on the journey to the cloud and able to share some of the best practices. And it's particularly important in my current position because a couple things fell out of my job jar. But 6 months ago, 2 things that entered my job jar were taking over responsibility for the public sector business in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, and then also in Latin America and Canada. So right now, I spend a lot of time talking to customers who are just beginning their journey on the cloud and talking about the things that they need to put in place to make it faster, more effective, more innovative. And I was really glad to see a couple of folks raise their hand and said they're from international locations, and so you get a free pass on any questions that you need to ask. Thanks, Troy.
Thank you. So let's start from an international perspective. Max, what are you seeing through your transition into Europe, Latin America, Caribbean, Canada, that either very similar aspects from a procurement and contracting? The one thing we look at, or I look at from my seat, is there's 44 different terms for I want to buy something. And very similar aspects from a procurement, from laws, regulations, and the practice of going out to tender in your world. But what have you seen on the ground with your teams and partners that are similar, and then what are some of the big contrasts?
Sure. The interesting, from a similarity perspective, I would tell you that in the contract procurement and acquisition community, I look at my customers and they have a set of tools. And they've been using these tools to buy IT hardware, software, and services for decades. And so the first thing that I notice is when we come to a discussion, they bring the set of tools that they've got, and they're asking, how do I apply these tools? And that's usually the part where we then kind of change the discussion to say, well, you may need to give yourself the freedom to get some new tools. The old tools just might not get you what you want. One small example, people want the agility and the speed and the innovation that cloud delivers. They want the fact that they can get access to 700 new capabilities announced in a year. And yet, the old tool that I often had as a government customer, as a public sector customer, was a contract that set a scope in place, and then I kind of lived with that scope for 3 years, maybe 3 years and 2 option years. And so that was one of the biggest things early on in the US that we worked with customers to think about building a couple of new sets of tools and not using the old ones, because when you apply the old tools and you establish an acquisition vehicle and your scope is fixed as of 2016, it starts to become less and less useful as you go to 2017, 2018, unless you've developed a acquisition methodology that, for instance, has maybe evergreen, or for instance, has a very robust engineering change proposal. In fact, I tell people in the public sector, if you want to drive innovation, then implement a mandatory engineering change type of a term in your contract. Make your vendor partners come to you, right, and deliver innovation. Make that part of the requirement. So, 2 sides of that coin. We work with a lot of customers around the world who've got the old tool set, and we try to bring to them examples from other customers around the world. We use NASA a lot. From other customers around the world of how they've created these new tools. And I think finally the other thing that we can do is we make a lot of these customer connections. And so I get requests. I was down in Bogota last month, and they're trying to put together a cloud computing strategy and cloud computing framework. And just being able to connect them with a couple of people was important. I don't think that was me.
Karen, thinking about, or from Max's comment about using best practices, so NASA certainly is one of the innovators in moving to the cloud. From your perspective, for those in the audience that may be on that initial part of the journey and working through moving from traditional IT and data centers into the cloud and thinking about how to do the procurement activities, what best practices can you share about your journey and being involved in that, and potential lessons learned, or things that you would do differently or that you would recommend people think about, especially from the audience perspective?
Okay, sure. So as Max alluded to, procurement in the government is cumbersome at best, hardly agile. And so we have taken the approach of using some of the very lightweight, more agile government-wide acquisition contracts and taking advantage of Amazon's partner network to do our Amazon procurements. And that's really allowed us a lot more flexibility. We did a couple dry runs or trial runs through small contracts to begin with. Set your terms and conditions, decide what you want to order, buy a small amount of it, and then use it and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, or where it doesn't work, go back and do another small procurement and fix it and fix that and try it again until you get everything right and just the way that you need it to be. And because those GWACs are so lightweight and so fast turnaround, you can do that in a relatively short amount of time. Okay.
At least we're not getting shocked when that happens.
No.
Right. So the other thing that Max talked about was kind of getting locked into a catalog of things that you can buy. Even worse in cloud is getting locked into today's price, because tomorrow's price is always going to be cheaper than today's price, the way that the trends have been going in cloud. And so what we did was we put a kind of contract in place that was involving non-specific ordering with on our NASA SOUP contract. So we award a contract through a partner for some maximum value, and then we start putting money, units of $1, on the contract, and we get invoiced every month for our actual usage. So we're not saying in advance, I want 10 terabytes of storage and 3 medium instances. Whatever it is people have the occasion and need and requirement to use in the process of doing their jobs, they use it. We make sure there's always enough money to cover what we're consuming, and then at the end of the month, we get the actual bill and we split it out for a pay-as-you-go type thing to all of our customers. So that's a couple of best practices that...
Can I add one other thing onto that? Because Karen hit a really important one.
Please.
This is another one of these very practical examples. The tool that a lot of traditional IT contracts use to try and control costs is that they'll say, you need to bid a fixed price for N amount of time. Or they may even say, you need to propose some kind of a discount, an incremental discount. And we worked in the UK with the Financial Conduct Authority because we understood what their vision was, and yet the technique that they were trying to apply from an acquisition perspective wasn't going to get them what they wanted. They were going to get some fixed unit prices, and they were going to get a couple of % drop, per year, whatever somebody could reasonably kind of estimate they thought it would drop at. And we suggested to them instead, and I would suggest to the audience here, that instead of asking for that, you ask the community for, give me a plan, give me your plan for continuous cost optimization. Because that's what you really want to get out of cloud computing, right? You want to be able to, as Karen said, follow the price curve down and the performance curve up inside of the scope of your contract. And in fact, you want to, again, ask the cloud community to give you tools that actually help you reduce your cost of computing, because the cloud allows you to optimize on the fly. Very different than buying a fixed infrastructure that once you buy it, you've got it. Once you've licensed it, you've got it. The real opportunity for public sector customers to innovate and also save money is by taking some of these things and changing that acquisition strategy. So very specifically, in your next acquisition, ask for the vendor's plan for continuous cost optimization, not for fixed unit prices.
No, that's a great follow-on. Thank you, Max. For those in the back, there's plenty of room up front. Please come in, have a seat. So, Jane, thinking about state and local and education customers, oftentimes we hear short turnaround times, right? Thinking about the end of a lot of states' fiscal year coming up here in all of 9 days, right? We see some very quick turnaround times. But oftentimes my question is, what are the best practices of working with state and local government and K-12 educational institutions to find existing contract vehicles? Because oftentimes what we see is that I'm not aware of existing vehicles that I could buy off of.
Right. So we've worked really hard in the last couple of years to develop what we call an IDIQ contracting pass, which is indefinite quantity and indefinite delivery. Thank you. And so and those contracting paths are primed by our partner community. And what I would stress in how those have been shaped for our customers is the fact that the scope is not prescriptive. It is for the scope. It becomes a cloud solution or cloud computing and storage, keeping the scope so it isn't I need X type of storage. That's where we would get into trouble, and our customers were unable to utilize the contracting or the procurement. So being less prescriptive on the scope. And another best practice I think that we've overcome in these IDIQ's contracting paths is also around the single SKU. Many of the traditional IT procurements listed hundreds of thousands of SKUs, by a particular server with 6 terabytes or how much storage. Keeping that to a single cloud computing, cloud storage, and so that the ultimate purchase order, you can set it for a price and be able to buy all of the innovative services that Amazon offers and continues to add to its portfolio on a rapid pace on the calendar. And then making these contract vehicles known throughout the customer community so that they can be aware. Most of these customers are aware of the institutions that have put these contracts in place. They're unaware that they can now buy cloud computing through those contract vehicles. So it's the education of making an awareness, and then how that contracting path differs from what they're used to buying, so that they can get used to buying a single SKU at not a set price, transparency in pricing, so that they can take advantage of the optimization of the pricing and the innovation. So they're out there. We continue to educate and evolve what those look like. Also, one last thing is the amount of, are you looking for infrastructure, a managed service offering, a SaaS offering? I think in state and local government and education, the biggest lesson that I learned on the outset was, of course, cloud computing was new to all of us, right? And what did that equal? Was it a managed service? To you, it might be. To you, it may simply be, I just need a server to take care of that overage that I have instead of going out and refreshing my server pool that I have. So again, setting the scope or asking for the type of procurement to solve the business need that you have, whether that be infrastructure as a service, a SaaS offering, or a managed service, or all three. And so these IDIQ contract vehicles incorporate sort of an umbrella effect of you can pick and choose from the various methodologies of procurement.
Thank you, Jane. So, Karen, NASA currently procures AWS through a partner. Mm-hmm. What are the advantages you see through that model?
Well, as we talked about earlier, using the government procurement itself, the traditional methodology is pretty complex, and so using a partner gives us. We have a reseller then relationship with the partner, and when you buy through a partner or a reseller, you have there are certain things that are typically part of the relationship, but you have to manage that relationship, and so you can tune it in one direction or the other. You can give the reseller a lot of control over your master accounts, your billing, the issuance of trouble tickets, all kinds of different things. You can give the reseller a lot of control, or you can negotiate to have for the reseller to have very little, if any, control. In our case, we wanted to have a relationship where the reseller had very little control. We did not want the reseller to have root access to any of our master accounts, and so we negotiated that out of the deal. We also negotiated that every incentive that got provided to us, that was provided by Amazon, any price reduction, any special kind of incentive, that the reseller would not get to keep that for themselves, but that they would pass that along directly to us. Okay, so those are some of the things that have been relevant in that managing that relationship.
Great. No, thank you. Max, from an international perspective, using UKG Cloud as an example, large contracts refreshed every 6 months. What perspective do you have to share with even the U.S. audience as well of how the flexibility works, or what advantages or disadvantages are you seeing from an international perspective?
UKG Cloud is an interesting case study because the United Kingdom has been at this for 4 years now. And they were doing really kind of what Karen said, which was they started off with a point of view and a contract framework, and they had a dialogue with industry, which is one of the things that I would encourage you to do, is have a point of view, have a framework. If your acquisition strategy permits, work from a draft first. So UKG Cloud, they had that draft. They worked with industry. They got comments back, and it's really clear from G Cloud Round 1 to the current version that they're on, G Cloud Round 8, about how much they have listened to their customers, the agency customers, and then also listened to the industry partners about how to improve the contract vehicle. And there's a marked difference. Their approach to the contract early on was a fixed scope and with no ability to really add products in between tranches, which they set up nominally every 6 months. They would refresh the contract vehicle, which was better than 3 years. But even 6 months is a long time between contract refreshes, particularly when you look at the constituents that are attracted to cloud. They are the ones who want to try things and be iterative, and they want to try out that new service offering and see if it works. So now they've gotten to the point with G Cloud where you can actually, inside categories, add new product offerings. The other major change that they made was they started with a set of terms and conditions that were very much like buying IT hardware and software. And that limited the amount of service offerings that companies could deliver on the G Cloud contract. Because what industry was doing was they were looking at their portfolio of capabilities and then having to cross off ones that couldn't live within the terms that started with. And so they started with a very small set of offerings. But through the dialogue now, we've gotten to the place where the government has realized they want the commercial benefits of cloud, and so they've adopted more commercial-like terms for the provision and use of cloud. And that's something that I think is universally necessary, is to be able to work with your acquisition strategy, your procurement specialists, and work to adopt commercial cloud computing terms and conditions and frameworks if you want the full access to the cloud services capability. Let's see, those are a couple of relevant ones. I'll stop. I could probably go on.
Yeah, and I think especially hearing Karen and you talk about one of the lessons learned that we're all hearing and seeing is lots of industry engagement. RFIs, question and answer period. I know recently our team responded to a GSA procurement and submitted 86 questions, and we're well aware that there was hundreds of questions. I know that can be challenging for the government to think through, Karen. So I'm wondering how on your side, through that question and answer period or through your small procurement activities and doing pilots, I really love that idea of instead of going large with the procurement initially, how do you think through a question and answer period, an RFI response, and how does that help shape, or how could industry help better partner with government on those initial pilot procurement activities?
Well, many of the people that are going to respond to your RFI have a lot of experience, obviously, that you don't have. You may not even really know the right questions to ask. You're just asking the best questions that you can. Asking sort of open-ended questions, leading questions, allows them the opportunity to give you the benefit of their experience and help you refine in your mind what things you really might want, or what things you want to explore further before you commit to one way or the other.
Okay, no, thank you for that perspective. So,
Troy, can I add one other thing?
Yeah, please.
I think it's also equally valuable to actually get an opportunity to see what the capabilities are like. And so you can get a certain amount of information through Q&A, but whether you do a live test demo or whether, in some way, shape, or form, one of the beautiful features of cloud computing is you can actually see, right, the alternative service offerings that are available. And I would encourage everybody, right, in the pre-RFP stage, in the learning stage, in the market survey stage, include the ability to actually see demonstrated capability, not just Q&A. I think you learn a lot from that demonstrated capability. Jane said a little bit earlier, try to avoid a typical hardware speccing exercise. So try to avoid saying, I want a 4 CPU, 8 gig virtual machine. Because right now, that is sort of an arbitrary indication of capability. I would suggest use functional descriptions and give the cloud community scenarios. How would you build a website for 200,000 student population, student body that needs to have the following characteristics? So if you give a functional description, then you get to see how different providers would propose their services to meet your need, and that gives you this learning opportunity. So I would just encourage you, get the functional learning as well as conducting good Q&A.
Can I add one piece
Yeah,
of that?
please, Jane.
Another methodology in contracting, leveraging on this proof of concept or try before you really buy, is look to your procurement department to find out about discretionary contracting, discretionary funding, or maybe you have purchase order limits up to a certain amount of threshold, $5,000, $10,000. You can buy a lot of AWS for those amounts, and it gives you the opportunity to get in there, open an account, and just test it out. Fail fast, that's what we say, right? Because what's the loss? You could get in there, give it a try,
Yes.
Try some of our partner offerings on the marketplace, and see how it works in your environment. And it even will expand your thought process of where can it better leverage to meet your business needs. So check out the discretionary type funding that are available for the lesser amounts of procurements without having to go out to bid immediately, because that's what really puts the challenge into buying anything in IT, right? So discretionary funding and limited PO amounts to just get started, get your feet wet.
Great, no, thank you, Jane. So I would like to be cognizant of the time with 15 minutes left. Do want to open it up for questions. If you could go to the mic so that everyone can hear. Thank you.
So my question is for Karen. You mentioned that you awarded a contract with the max value, but you put $0 against that contract in order for you to pay for your usage each month. Has that increased the amount of time for your contracting officer that now they have to do it on a monthly basis versus doing it on a quarterly or an annual basis? And have you seen any challenges in doing that?
No, we have a fairly straightforward and smooth process. We call it like the Starbucks card, if you will. We got all the accounts set up for all of the different customers. They load up money. We keep track of how much is drawn down on the overall procurement vehicle, and we add in bulk as necessary. And doing it monthly seems to work out pretty good because people get itemized bills then, and there's a real traceability between what I did in the last 30 days and I can see what I'm really paying for here. So I think we could do it the other way, but kind of like the 30-day window.
For the panel in general, you've provided some very meaty, meaningful insights. If we were on the C2S side, is there some way to get this information in general? Is it a quick start, or are there white papers about how you all broke the code for procuring? And then on the second part of the question is, are there counterparts on the C2S side that you could point me towards on a contracting perspective?
Absolutely. So to answer both of those questions, for those on the C2S side or our national security team in general, I would love to talk to each and every one of you and connect you with our team, because I do think there's some great best practices around contracting, but then also how to work with that community. So our capture, contracts, business development team can certainly look to help provide some of that guidance, either from what we're doing on the high side as well as working through the existing C2S contract vehicle to add your capabilities.
Can I add one other thing?
Yeah, please.
So this is one of these areas where I think government gave themselves the ability to be innovative by using the different contracting tools at their disposal. And in particular, we announced a couple of months ago that the AWS Marketplace was now available in C2S. And the AWS Marketplace is the online catalog for buying cloud computing capability from Amazon. So it's search, point, click, and launch, buy and launch. So you have real running capability. What they did was they took advantage of a technique called commercial item contracting. And they recognized that there was this commercial marketplace on Amazon that already sold thousands and thousands of things in huge quantities to commercial customers. And so that had established a price reasonableness for those items that were acquired through that new electronic catalog process. And so they took that idea and changed it into commercial item subcontracting through the AWS Marketplace for the IC. And so just a quick example of how government has these tools, and it's sometimes how do you take them and apply them to a use case that's going to help you. That is, the trick.
So my organization is struggling a bit with the budgeting side of this. On-prem infrastructure you can capitalize, but these cloud services, maybe that's pushing the budget over towards operational expenses. So any thoughts around how to have that conversation internally with our organization might be helpful.
Well, I mean, you definitely have to go through a planning process if you're going to make the conversion from fixed infrastructure on your premise to to the OpEx model, essentially. And we've actually had a couple of groups go big into doing a prototype in the cloud, and they say, well, this is nice, but it's going to take me 2 years to get the budget flattened out so that I have a steady stream of income to support it. You can use for example, the Amazon online calculator to try to mock up what the cost of your activity is going to be so that you have time to advance plan, shuffle money around however it takes to do that. I would not go into it without planning.
So in about 2 days, our organization will be completing our first year with AWS on the cloud. And a couple of things that we learned and some things that were mentioned here. Max, you're right about the tool sets. One of the things that we struggled with our acquisition process was a set of tools that we were using in government procurement 10 years ago that don't really apply to the current model. Our development team and our DevOps team is very disruptive, very much what's next down the line, and we were having difficulty getting boxed in. So my question is actually for Jane. When we're a big fan of IDIQ, but our regulations at the time wouldn't allow us to do that for this particular procurement. So we tried to fashion our solicitation to be as close to that as possible. We looked at buying cloud services the same way you would look at a utility, for instance. Right. We wanted to take part in whatever it was we needed to use, whenever we needed to use it, and not when we didn't. The struggling part and the choke point was, how do you get past the point where in order to have a valid and fair and open competition, you have to have some portion of this that's price related, and it has to be equal and across the board so that you can compare bids and certify the procurement. The notion of not boxing yourself in with a spec is obviously something you really want to take advantage of. Mm-hmm. What we did was we created basically a mock spec, a mock set of items from the catalogs and said, bid on this for comparison purposes. My question is there a better way to do that so that it's less confusing to the bidders who think they're bidding on, that they're thinking that's part of the scope, when all you're really saying is, here's a set and we want to know how you're going to construct the way you're going to treat us financially so that we can treat you all equally.
Right, and you're not alone, right? I've seen that and been asked that question many times. And I think the most successful procurements that I've seen where they've attempted to address apples to apples, it hasn't been successful. They end up getting best price, but they really don't get best value, right?
Best value.
Exactly. So I would encourage that, yes, there is a pricing component to it. Actually, the example that I'm thinking of is when the state of Texas put out their contract vehicle, and they actually asked, they quickly learned in their first iteration, they asked for the price comparison, and they quickly learned that it was all over the map, right? They simply could not get to that apples and apples. So they came back to the vendor community and said, here's the business, here's the scenario. And they actually gave a couple of different scenarios, right? And asked the vendor community to work through how they would solve that particular need. And it was a simplistic one, right? And ultimately it had to have a price below it, right? But it was then based upon that best value of how would that vendor go through and solve that business need in 3 examples. And that's how they compared. And I can go back to Texas today and they can say it was a very arduous process of evaluation. But that's what they had to do because the ecosystem does not lend itself to an apples-to-apples pricing compare. And that's what I would suggest, best value and a business scenario.
And explain the price evaluation model. So if you construct the functional evaluation, explain it and say, this is a functional price evaluation model, not a task order, for the purpose of trying to establish what our projected cost could be for this type of workload.
So there's an Amazon rep on the panel, right? That's, or what are you, Amazon rep on the panel? Anybody from Amazon?
I'm sorry, I
I'm
didn't hear
sorry?
the
I'm
question.
sorry, we're having a hard time hearing.
Yes, or is there an Amazon rep on the panel?
Yes, Max, Jane, and myself.
Okay, good. My question is to you, gentlemen. I'm an architect working for FDA. The culture's very similar to NASA's. I'm working helping them with the cloud strategy for one of the FDA centers. We've procured GovCloud as of January. It's GovCloud, not commercial cloud, not east, not west, right? From a Sidral point of view, it's T's and I's as the government would expect it to behave. So I'm trying to help my center on board with some capabilities, simple cloud bursting infrastructure. The whole process is now stalled for 6 months because they state that they have to go back and figure out how to explain the chargeback model. My position is you've gone to ATO, you procured it. Why don't we just pull Amazon in, explain your chargeback model? This is GovCloud. It's not commercial, it's not east or west. So I assume that the chargeback model should already be very mature in regards to understanding how you at least approach a civilian government agency. I've worked for Defense Intelligence and NASA. So I'm just talking for the civilian agency. You would assume out of the gate we understand how to do that with predictability. Amortization of cost, OpEx versus CapEx, yeah, that's a growing curve. But hey, you're in production, we should be able to know how to procure services. So to the Amazon reps, my question is, first of all, why can't we just build on the GSA's cloud config effort? We're under pressure, like everybody from FITARA, Data Center Optimization Initiative. They want to explain how we're outsourcing data center functionality to the cloud. They want to understand how we're going to save money. That's happening right now with Tony Scott, not next year, not 2 years. That OMB memo is out now with a 6-month deadline to explain this, or maybe possibly take budgetary punishment for not complying. So where do you go? I suggest we bring Amazon in and say, just explain the chargeback model and let's look at the deltas of what's different above and beyond that. Or let's just go and sit down with the GSA with their schedule and figure out how they're doing it with cloud config. Why isn't it that straightforward?
I don't know why it's not that straightforward because you know, with the tools that you have available from Amazon, you've got detailed billing reports. You can use is it called organizations?
Yep.
Yeah. Amazon provides customers tools in addition to giving you the total raw billing detail, which is I think what Karen was alluding to.
Yeah.
We also provide customers at no charge a tool that allows you to basically establish department codes or charge codes. And when you tag your computing resources or your storage resources and you say, this is Department A, this is Department B, and this is Department C, then through using this tool, you can actually get a view of that organizational consumption of cloud computing under a single contract. So then there's third parties. We've got partners at the exhibit hall today that provide spend management tools. So there's a company called Cloud Checker that if you want, super duper sort of analytics, more than Amazon just gives you out of the box, that's a third option. But we should be able to answer those questions.
I'd like to follow up with you reps afterwards because
Sure.
Let's do that.
Follow up with you reps afterwards because at FDA and other agencies now, there's a lot of pressure to come forward with understanding how to start to procure services, move services, show what's going on.
No,
and,
we'd love to talk, and I think also connect you government to government for those that have already solved this problem. So we can certainly connect and have that discussion.
And just one last thing, being in GovCloud, those same tools are available in GovCloud as well. So,
Jake Bauer with Mercom Corporation. We're a federal reseller. My question for Karen is, do you have value in having high-level presentations during that process, trying to do your trial? Because you said partners a lot of time through Q&A they know a lot about the AWS. Do you find proof of concepts in person would be valuable? And also with resellers, what advice would you give and what are you looking for when you're working with resellers?
Repeat the last part. What do you want to know about resellers?
What are you looking for? What advice maybe would you give to better partner with the federal government in procuring cloud when they're new to it?
I see. Okay. So let me answer that part. the more flexible a reseller is willing to be, the more useful you can be to a government partner. I talked about passing through price incentives, talked about flexibility with who issues tickets and who manages tickets when you have some sort of problem. And especially in the area, a lot of government agencies are not going to want resellers having root access to their master accounts. So those kinds of things, more flexibility, the better off you can be to your government customer. And then, of course, in some cases, as a reseller or partner, you have the opportunity to sell integration services too. And in our case, we completely separated the acquisition of the actual Amazon from any integration or development services. Those are totally different things, and we developed a lot of those skills in-house to use the Amazon essentially. But you may be able to, if you have a rich set of services, you as a reseller probably do fairly well with some of the government customers who are going to need that kind of help.
Thank you.
So this is actually a question again for the NASA contract. It's a two-part question. The first part of the question is, did you incorporate an exit strategy into the contract? So for whatever reason, if when the contract has to be renewed and you have to move from one CSP to another, is that incorporated in your current contract?
In terms of protecting NASA data, absolutely we did. If it ends in a divorce, you always want to be able to take all your stuff, have it all still belong to you, all your intellectual property rights and everything, and yes, our contract terms do provide for that.
And the second part is actually dealing with the color of money for the contract. One of the things that we've been challenged with is that even though it is an OpEx, so you would think it's an O&M color of money, for your initial contract for the very first year, were you able to use O&M dollars for the entire POP for that first year, or were you forced to use procurement dollars?
I'm not sure our agency colors the money in those.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's
different-
DOD. Yeah, I'm sorry. We have a DOD. In the DOD, we have different colors of money that we use, but I thought it was federal wide, that you had different buckets of money according to the FAR.
I don't know. It was all green money, and Amazon accepted it all.
Because we're running a challenge from the contracting side as far as once we hit a certain dollar amount, they want to say that it's going to be procurement. Although we've gone back and forth with the lawyers trying to tell them it's a op expense, so it should be operations and maintenance.
Oh, I see. So it's almost like I was talking about the discretionary buying.
Right.
It's just an operating expense, like you're going out buying pencils and pens. I should be able to use my
but the
P-card to buy this.
But the problem is, if you're buying 1,000 laptops that cost you $3 million,
Right.
they're wanting you to use procurement dollars until you can get the lawyers involved to say, well, no, you take it down to the smallest unit, pencil, paper, laptop.
Right.
Then now we can use, because the amount of dollars that we're getting from big DODs obviously shrinking, and the amount of procurement dollars that we're getting is shrinking as well. So we're trying to figure out how did NASA, what kind of money did NASA use to do the procurement for AWS? I would think it'd be O&M, but
I don't know that distinction in the same way. Sorry. Nobody's ever challenged me on any kind or color of money that we applied to the contract. We take everybody's money.
thank you.
Okay, last question, please.
Hi, I am here from the world of higher education, so probably it's directed there. One of the things that I'm an engineer, and as we are looking at bringing Amazon in through DLT and how people pay for it is, these are tied to what are called ETFs, so educational technology funds. They're backed by bonds, so it's tied to a physical asset.
Right.
Do you have any experience or knowledge of how people have that conversation to start saying, well, we've been tasked with moving this stuff to Amazon or to Azure, but our ability to purchase has been tied to these physical assets and ETFs?
Right. It doesn't come up often, but definitely having those conversations, and I'm happy to speak to you offline. But same thing with credits and things like that, and data egress that are relevant in the education community. From my perspective, we're really handling them one-off and finding workarounds to make it a successful buy. Have you? any specific examples? I can't come up with one off the top of my head. Credits and federal grants. Federal grants have also been a challenge for the education community in higher ed, and we're addressing them. Not really at scale, which is something we need to figure out. But
I would tell you, I think that's one of those places where a lot of us in the public sector are trying to deal with an old tool set and apply it to a new problem. Is Brett McMillan in the audience?
no, but Jamie's here.
Jamie here. Jamie, what was the announcement about grants for NIH? Didn't they just come up with a new policy to allow using cloud computing in an area that had formerly had a policy that said you had to use hardware?
I don't know the specifics, but it was essentially the ability that now PIs could apply for cloud credits, and they were actually able to get, they could designate cloud credits versus having to procure hardware. So that was a big leap.
Thanks, Jamie. This is probably a good place for us to wrap up with that best practice, because this is an example where we've got customers that are wrestling with old tools and coming up with new solutions, and we can connect you with that, because maybe you can bring that as basically a government case study, back to the organization. But I think Jane's right. Right now, we tend to be addressing those on a case-by-case basis because policy differs.
So please come forward and let's get you connected with the right folks, and we can help to address those issues, those challenges.
And subsequently, there are 2 additional procurement-related sessions today. So if we haven't gotten to your question, you can hold for...
the one immediately following at 10 o'clock, and then at 2 o'clock, the one at 10 o'clock, we're actually going to demo, how do we encrypt and why does the term exist for, not encrypting. It's actually a demo off of the Amazon console. And then at 2 o'clock, the learning about the cloud-ready contracts that I've alluded to.
So, thank you all for your participation and questions today.
Thank you.